Okay, we've made it to week 15 of domestic relations. Your last week of lectures. Your final exam is already posted. So make sure that you get your discussion and assignments done and then do your final exam so we can wrap up this semester. Okay, so in week 15, we are going to be talking about children's services, why and how Children's Services has the authority to come in to a home. And in some states, we call it Child Protective Services. And then adoptions and how adoptions can work. There's a couple of different tracks you can take with adoptions. Now, why are we talking about this in family law, domestic relations? When it comes to the government coming in and removing a child from the home, there is the opportunity to go to domestic relations court in some states. In some states, you do this through probate court. And so domestic relations court or family court will decide whether a child should be reunited with their parent. Now, the process is different from state to state, even from county to county in Ohio. However, I want to go through why the government is even permitted to come and remove a child from the home, and then talk about what happens to that child and the process of reunification with the parents if possible. Okay? I've talked a lot about the fact that family court, domestic relations court, even juvenile court, with respect to parenting issues, has an obligation to the child. The court, once you are in one of those courts, the court retains jurisdiction over that child until that child is emancipated. That's a huge deal. You know, it kind of rolls off my tongue, but the truth of the matter is those judges take that very, very seriously. Once a child comes within their jurisdiction, under their jurisdiction through whatever kind of action, the court is responsible. The judge, and every time I say the court, what I really mean is the judge is responsible for that child's welfare, safety. Now, does that mean that the judge takes these children into their home? No, metaphorically I'm talking about. And if it comes to the court's attention that something's going on with that child, then the court jumps in. The same can be said for the state. Okay? Now, we're not talking about the federal government. We're talking about individual states. Each individual state has an obligation to care for its children. Now, again, does that mean that the state has an obligation to put food on the table, put clothes on their body? No. But the state has an obligation to make sure that really bad stuff isn't happening to children. Okay? And the standard that the state uses is abuse and neglect. If a child is abused or neglected, the state has the obligation, not just, hey, if we feel like it, we're gonna, has the obligation to make sure that that child is removed from the situation where there's abuse and neglect, and make sure that wherever the child goes, there is no abuse or neglect. Now, that's a really, really low standard. I can't stress to you enough what a low bar that is. That, you know, the state doesn't go in and say, gosh, each kid doesn't have their own bedroom. That's really awful. We're going to remove this child. The state doesn't come in and say, what? There's no iPad for every child in this home? That's horrific. Out of here. No. The standard is the child living in an environment where there's food? Is the child clothed? Now, those clothes can be hand-me-downs, don't fit. Are the clothes reasonably clean? Again, we know kids go out and play in mud puddles or whatever. And maybe their parents don't, or whichever parent they're living with, or both parents can't afford a washer and dryer. And so the pants are going to be a little dirty till they can go to the laundromat on Sunday. Okay. It doesn't mean that they have, 14 pairs of pants and 6 pairs of pajamas. It means, do they have clothes? Do they have shoes that fit their feet? Are they walking around barefoot, or do they have shoes? Doesn't mean do you have 20 pairs of shoes. Do you have a pair of shoes that fit? Okay? And especially for younger children, are they being left on their own? Are they being neglected? Now, does that mean, that they are neglected in that they are left for a few hours while mom goes to the grocery store? Again, depending on the child, probably not. But when we come to really small children, are we leaving a baby alone? Yeah, that's neglect. Are we not changing a baby's diaper? So much so that the baby has a huge rash on their bottom. That's neglect. Okay? Are we feeding them, popsicles for breakfast and ice cream sandwiches for lunch? And that's all they're eating? That's neglect. Some corners it's abuse. Okay? So when I say it's a low bar, what I mean is parents don't have to do a ton to say that a child is neither neglected nor abused. And the reason we have that is the state is not allowed to say, this is the way everybody raises their children. It's an individual thing. Parents set the standards within their homes. And as long as we don't abuse or neglect our children, the state stays out of our business. Okay? If we're not sending our children to school, neglect. Okay? Those kinds of things. So before a child can be removed from the home, there needs to be some kind of a complaint and investigation. And Child Protective Services, or Children's Services, as it's sometimes called, will be the agency that comes in and does the investigation. Once a complaint is made, there must be an investigation. There can't be, oh, that got to be ridiculous. That would never happen, right? We hear about kids in cages. You think, oh, God, who would put kids in cages? That's outrageous. Nobody would ever do that. And then after the investigation, you find out, oh, yeah, they're putting kids in cages. Okay, so you've got to make sure that the allegation is investigated by a caseworker. A caseworker will come in and then make a recommendation saying there is abuse, there isn't abuse, there isn't neglect, there isn't neglect. And then if, in fact, there is abuse and neglect, the agency will remove the child from the home and place the child with, hopefully, family members, somebody who knows the children, and if there is nobody, then foster care. Now, the foster care system is put in to take care of children who have no one else. It's awful. It's really awful. It's necessary, but it's awful. The social worker or the caseworker for children's services may go to the court and ask for an ex parte order for temporary custody. You may remember what ex parte means. It means away from, nobody else has to be there, no cross-examination. And then the court generally will grant it, and the children will be removed from the home and either placed with family or placed in foster care. Sometimes the police will come and remove the children, and the children will be with the police while they're getting the ex parte order. Just kind of depends on how bad the situation is. Then what happens is the family court will go, or juvenile court will have a hearing with the parents represented by counsel to determine whether or not temporary custody should be granted to the state. Now, when I say temporary custody, everybody thinks, oh, it's just temporary. Like next Tuesday, I'll get my kids back. Temporary means until they're 18. That's what temporary custody means. A lot of parents don't know that. A lot of parents are like, sure, just take temporary custody while I get my act together. And once I get my act together, we'll be fine. No, doesn't work that way. Temporary custody means the state has custody of the children. The parents of the children will be the state until such time as the biological parents file a motion with the court to show that custody should be returned to them. Okay? It's crummy. It's really, really, really crummy. Understand that even when temporary custody is given to the state, Children's Services is tasked with reunifying the family, is tasked with putting together a reunification plan so that the parents can go through steps, and if they satisfy all of the steps, the child will be reunited with the parents. They're not really hard things. There'll be things like go to parenting classes, go to nutrition classes so you know what you're supposed to feed your child, get a job, get a bank account, stop doing drugs, those kinds of things. And they're very specific. Like, it's not like the state goes, hey, just, make sure your house is okay, and then can move the goalpost. It's very specific. You must have baby formula in the house for babies. You must have 16 boxes of clean diapers. You must have gone to 20 parenting classes and gotten a certificate that said you completed the course. It's very specific because we don't want the state to overstep the individuals who are the parents. We don't want the state to be able to move the goalpost. We want it to be quite specific. So when parents do that, then they can file a motion of reunification, or Children's Services can file a motion for reunification. Okay? If they don't do it, the state will come in and say, we would like to terminate parental rights. We don't think these people are going to ever be able to meet these guidelines. Perhaps parents are in jail for 20 years. Well, then they're obviously never going to be able to terminate the arrangement with the state until the child has reached the age of majority. Lots of times what Children's Services will do is they will put a child in foster care. They will list that child with an adoptive agency, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. They'll try and find someone to adopt the child. Then Children's Services and the adoption agency will approach the parent and say, we have someone who will take this child. And sometimes parents will voluntarily terminate their rights. This happens actually more than you would imagine, specifically with women who are substance abusing, who have children that they know they can't take care of, that they don't want to take care of. Once you take the monetary incentive away from a lot of these people who have children, and by that I mean if their child is on Social Security disability, they stop getting that check. Or if they're receiving child support, they stop receiving that child support. Once you do that, a lot of parents say, yeah, there's no real reason for me to take care of this kid because I'm not getting any money for it. And I know that sounds horrific, and that happens a lot. So those parents will voluntarily terminate the rights. If they won't voluntarily terminate their rights, the court will hold a hearing and they will terminate the rights of the biological parents. The way the court does that is there are a list of things that the court has to consider. Typically, it just ends up being what's in the best interest of the child, and does it ever look like these parents are ever going to be able to hit the mark? And again, that happens a lot. I would love to tell you that this is an area of family law that is rare. It's not. It's not. Happens all the time. Last time I was in juvenile court in Mahoning County, every Tuesday they had these parental rights hearings. Children's Services has their own attorney. They show up to juvenile court. Remember, Mahoning County does not have a family court, but in Mahoning County, so they handle these matters in juvenile court. So, Children's Services shows up and says, thumbs up, thumbs down. Judge, they're not meeting the reunification plan guidelines. They're not going to parenting classes. They're not doing it. The court will say, well, we'll extend our time period a little bit longer. Generally, that goes on for a year where the child is in limbo. And then the child may or may not end up being permanently part of the foster care system because their parental rights have been terminated. Okay? So what can we do with these children? Well, adoption is the best option. It can either be through an agency or a public adoption where the child is in foster care and the agency child support protective services is actively trying to find somebody to adopt this child. That's a big part of foster care, is trying to adopt these children out. There are private adoption agencies where it is just a privately owned company and they will make arrangements for adoptions. Now, when we think of adoptions, for kids that are in foster care, that's one area of adoption, but it's also for moms who are pregnant, who don't want to keep their children. You can adopt out, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I don't want you to lose sight of that. Okay, we also have step-parent adoptions. Outside of this foster care termination of parental rights part of the adoption world. If you are a parent and you remarry, you can, under certain circumstances, have your new husband or wife adopt your children. If the biological parent is still alive, that biological parent has to terminate his or her parental rights and responsibilities. If the biological parent is deceased, then there's an investigation done by Children's Services just to make sure everybody's on the up and up and the children can be adopted. Let's go back to the biological parent is still alive. It's actually a pretty big deal for a biological parent to sign off saying, I no longer wish to be the parent of this child. That's a really, really, really big deal. And I'm going to tell you when it normally happens. It normally happens when mom and dad are divorced, or mom and dad were never married, and dad is out of the picture. Dad has moved away. Dad never sees the children. And dad owes a lot of child support. And so as part of the agreement to terminate parental rights, the mom will say, I don't care about your child support, go away. That is the most common time a biological parent will sign away. Also, if a parent is in prison and doesn't have a relationship with the child. Now, when I say doesn't have a relationship with the child, that means for a minimum of 1 year, there has been no contact between the biological parent and the child. And by that I mean the biological parent and grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles. There's no relationship with that side of the family for a minimum of 1 year. That means no birthday cards, no phone calls, no texts, no nothing for an entire year. That's a long time. And that's why the court kind of considers it abandonment. If for 1 year you don't even care whether your child is breathing, okay, you've pretty much abandoned your child. Okay? And the court will then entertain your motion to terminate parental rights and responsibilities. Once that happens, the adoption can go forward. Children's Services will always do an investigation of both parents, believe it or not. So let's say that, my husband passes away and I remarry, and my new husband wants to adopt my children. I'm going to get investigated too. Why? Maybe I'm kooky. Maybe I'm putting my kids at risk with my new husband. Maybe this is a fraudulent thing where I'm being made to do this. There are lots of reasons why Children's Services needs to come in and do an investigation. So once that investigation is over, then the adoption can go forward. Now, adoptions take place in probate court. They don't happen in family court. Okay? But this whole idea of parental rights and responsibilities happens in family court or domestic relations court. Okay? Can you have a gay adoption? Yeah, you can. Gay people can get married. They can adopt. Not a problem. And you're not allowed not to place a child just because it's a same-sex marriage. Okay? Open adoption. Open adoption is where everybody involved is going to be in the child's life. So let's say that I am pregnant, which, God, I hope I'm not. But if I'm pregnant and I'm giving my child up for adoption, I leave the door open for me to at least have some kind of a relationship with the baby, even though the baby's parents and their biological parents actually will be listed, their adoptive parents will be listed on their birth certificate as their biological parents. That's one thing I should probably mention. When you're adopted, your birth certificate changes. If it's a step parent and dad is adopting the children, the birth certificates of the children will be changed so that step parents' name becomes biological father on the birth certificates. It's just adoption is viewed as the same as being a biological parent. Okay? So with an open adoption, we have a little bit of, yes, their names are on the birth certificate, but I have the right to still see the baby sometimes or see the child as the child grows. Okay? If I can't have children, I want to have children, but I can't. I can ask someone to carry my child for me. That's called surrogacy. Now, that can happen lots and lots of different ways, but it's always with a contract because bad things happen when you don't have an agreement up front. Okay? There's gestational surrogacy, there's altruistic, there's all these different kinds of surrogacy contracts. All involve some kind of in vitro fertilization where you have the egg and the sperm of either, what if I can't have children? So the egg and the sperm of me and my husband implanted in someone else, or, if my eggs are no good, maybe the sperm of my husband and the egg of the surrogate. And with gay surrogacy, it's the sperm of one of the gay partners, and then the egg of a donor. but it's always in vitro fertilization. It's always implanted into someone who can carry the baby to term. You can have egg donation from the surrogacy or not. Your book goes through all these different kinds of contracts, and you should take a minute to read those. The bottom line is, this is a tough area of law because a woman who carries a baby to term has a connection with that baby. And so it's really hard to walk away from that baby, even though it may not even be your egg. And so these surrogacy contracts are tough, really, really tough, because the woman can have the baby and say, no, I'm going to keep this baby. And you end up in contractual disputes. So the contracts have to be really airtight. However, the surrogate basically is giving the child up for adoption. It's hard. It's very, very hard. Okay? All right, that's it for this chapter. Go ahead and, do your assignments and your vocabulary and your discussion for here. If you have any questions, as always, please give me a call, text me, let me know that you're having trouble. Thank you.